Skrag climbed to the top of the rubble pile that had once been a building. Perhaps a hadblock, pondered Skrag, but the thought disappeared as he peered over the lip of the pile. Guardsmen stood about talking. One of them in particular caught Skrag's attention. The guardsman wearing the fancy hat and the big coat covered in shiny stuff. That had to be the Humie the boss was after, thought Skrag. Scrambling back down the rubble, he darted through the ruins of the Imperial Hive City. The Humies loved putting statues on all their buildings, especially ones of their golden boss. Skrag wasn't impressed. To him, it all looked like junk. Skrag scampered down a narrow hallway when a huge green hand grabbed him and yanked him up off his feet. Before he knew what had happened, Skrag found himself face to face with the
Boss!
He squeaked.
I just found the Humie you was looking for.
Just as quickly as he'd been picked up, Skrag was dropped, landing unceremoniously on his arse. Clambering back to his feet, Skrag beheld not only the boss, but his knobs too. There must have been hundreds, but Skrag couldn't be sure. He had never been able to count past 5.
Boys wanna see,
growled the boss. The knobs eyed Skrag menacingly, clawed hands gripping their shooters tighter.
This way, boss.
Skrag stammered, dashing off back the way he'd come from, the orcs hot on his heels. As they reached the rubble pile, he turned to the boss.
They's on the other side,
he whispered. The boss glared down at Skrag.
you's better be right, Grot.
The orcs barged past Skrag, knocking him to the ground. As he struggled back to his feet, a knob following sent him sprawling back down.
Gits!
Skrag muttered under his breath as he was finally able to get to his feet. At the lip of the rubble pile, Skrag saw the boss and the knobs gathered together. They wasted no time. Raising his power claw into the air, the boss roared. As one, they charged over the lip and down the other side towards the guardsman. Almost immediately, Skrag heard the sounds of Humie shouting, followed by the whip-crack fire of las guns. Not wanting to miss the crumping, Skrag hurried up the pile to watch. Looking over the lip, Skrag almost lost his head to a stray lasbolt zipping past.
Soggy!
He squealed, ducking down. When he thought it was safe, or as safe as it could be, Skrag braved another look. The orcs were amongst the Humies. Their charge had been so sudden, and the resistance so disorganized, not a single greenskin had fallen. Skrag saw the boss. With his immense claw, the orc tore a guardsman in half. Blood sprayed into the air, coating the boss in crimson. With his shooter in his other hand, the boss spit blazing death into another guardsman. Daka blasted the Humie to pieces, as well as most of the area around him. Bits of rockcrete and plasteel flew in all directions, and the boss bellowed a war cry. The knobs responded, their own killing just as frenzied. They cried as their shooters roared and their choppers cleaved. Through the carnage, Skrag could make out one of the guardsmen huddled behind some debris. A cunning smile split his face, and fancying his chances, Skrag drew his slugger and set off down the rubble pile and into the massacre unfolding. Bodies littered the ground, and Skrag had to crawl through blood and spent shells to get close enough to his prey. The guardsman hadn't seen him yet. He was screaming into a funny-looking box with dials and blinking lights. Skrag didn't care though. He lined up his slugger, took aim, and fired. The first shot went wide. The second hit the funny box, making it spark and burst into flames. The third shot hit the guardsman in the face, and he slumped forward dead.
Got him!
Shrieked Skrag, but no one heard, or cared to. The fighting was done. The knobs busied themselves looting anything they could. Scuffles quickly broke out between them over the best stuff. The boss didn't appear bothered though. As far as Skrag could tell, the boss was looking for something. Skrag saw him reach down and pick something up. When he rose, Skrag saw what it was. The funny hat the leader Humi had on. The boss was now wearing it. The hat perched precariously on the orc's oversized head. He looked ridiculous, but Skrag would never tell him that, not unless he fancied a good thumping, or worse. An ugly smile spread across the boss's face.
Look here, lads,
Bellowed the boss. The knobs quit their brawling to behold their leader.
see Giuseppe, yous know what this means.
The knobs stared blankly at him. The boss snarled in irritation.
It means I is now the big boss.
The knobs looked at one another, unsure what that meant. He was already the boss, and proper big too. The boss roared in triumph. The knobs, still confused but trusting their leader, threw back their heads and roared too. Skrag watched on when something made his ears prick up. A sound, distant and low, barely audible over the orcs. He strained to try and hear it. Skrag was sure he'd heard what sounded like thumping, but the sound was gone. Instead, he now heard a faint whistle. He didn't have to strain too hard to hear that, because it was getting louder. It was getting closer. In fact, Skrag was as certain as his little grot mind could be that it was right above them. Skrag thought hard. He racked his brain for the word. He gave his head a wobble and banged his hand against it, trying to shake the answer out.
Artillery,
He said, the word rattling out of the depths of his orcoid brain.
I can hear artillery.
He smiled, feeling genuine pride for recalling the word.
I can hear artillery.
He panicked.
Boss, get down. The Humies is...
But it was too late. The orcs were still bellowing into the sky when a flash of light exploded in front of Skrag, blinding him. A thunder crack left his ears ringing, and a force picked him up and threw him backwards. He tumbled, head over arse, flailing like a rag doll until he hit the ground with a sickening crack. Skrag stayed where he'd landed, moving hurt, and something wet was leaking from him. Slowly his vision cleared, but his hearing didn't. Thick smoke filled the air, and Skrag could smell the familiar stench of cooked orc. He lifted his head, painfully, and looked about. Everyone was gone. The boss, the knobs, even the dead humies. He laid his head back down and stared up at the sky. Something caught his attention. Something drifting down through the smoke. It carried gently on the air, coming to rest next to Skrag's prone body. The Grot turned his head to observe it. It was the boss's fancy new hat. Skrag slowly sat up. He took the hat in his small clawed hand and inspected it. It was almost untouched by the bombardment. It wasn't scorched or bloodied. Just a bit of dust stained the brim. Skrag brushed it off, and delicately, with ears still ringing and his head pounding like a war drum, he lowered it onto his head. It fit perfectly. Skrag smiled, letting out a devious little chuckle.
Guess this means Oz is the big boss now.
Then his vision spun, and he felt faint, falling backwards into unconsciousness. Still smiling. Skrag the Grot, Skrag the Fancy, Skrag the Big Boss.